Do you trust your government? Can you imagine that they might not always be telling the truth, or that figures on the inside might know something world-changing, while the rest of the world is wholly unawares? In this video, we're taking a closer look at the modern UAP phenomenon, plus an in-depth view of Element 115, the supposedly crucial substance that could be the key to it all. Finally, though, we're counting down 10 of the most prominent, significant, and frankly disturbing examples of when the government certainly has hidden something massive in the past. Not all of these are space-related, but they serve to show exactly what our global powers are capable of. This is Unveiled, and today we're answering the extraordinary question, is the government hiding something big from space?
Do you need the big questions answered? Are you constantly curious? Then why not subscribe to Unveiled for more clips like this one, and ring the bell for more thought-provoking content.
Are we alone in the universe? Is there life beyond Earth? And if there is, then could the powers that be really be keeping it a secret? Non-human technology. In the first half of 2023, it became the buzzword for alien hunters, UFO enthusiasts, conspiracy theorists, for anyone with even an inkling that the government might be trying to cover something up. But why? And what has changed in UFO science to so dramatically accelerate our search for the truth in recent times? The latest push for disclosure arguably started with the efforts of one David Grush, an increasingly high-profile whistleblower who had previously worked within the U.S. military and government. Among many senior positions held by Grush, he had been involved with the Unidentified Aerial Phenomenon Task Force, an investigative branch of the government, in short, set up to explore the credibility of UFO, or now UAP, sightings and reports. The American authorities have received more and more such reports in recent years, and so have been forced into channeling more time, money, and resources to them. And Grush had essentially been working at the very heart of all of that. Many believe then that his claims carry a great deal of weight and legitimacy. But what exactly has he said? Grush first went public with what he alleged to know in an explosive June 2023 article for The Debrief, written and researched by the noted and respected UFO journalists Leslie Kean and Ralph Blumenthal. In the article, and in various subsequent interviews, Grush insisted that, contrary to what they'd have you believe, the U.S. government knows full well that there are aliens out there. It knows it because it has had continuous access to an untold amount of information and material since at least World War II. For example, Grush alleges that toward the end of World War II, a craft of non-human origin that had been previously uncovered by the Italian dictator Benito Mussolini was sent to and stored in the United States for further study during the post-war years. It suggested that multiple intelligence agencies were involved here, and even that the Vatican had a hand in what happened. Although it's unclear what ultimately came of the craft in question in this particular case. Clearly, a lot of time has passed in the decades since the late 1940s. Knowledge has grown, developments have unfolded, and opinions have evolved. But Grush, again in the Debrief article and in interviews afterwards, reckons that not much has changed in terms of the deep-rooted secrecy at the heart of official UFO study. Claiming to have heard firsthand from various, mostly unnamed sources within the government or close to, Grush has suggested that the U.S. has long run dedicated initiatives to find and recover things like crashed UFOs, bits broken off of passing UFOs, and even dead UFO pilots. There are then suggestions that most of this is entirely unknown because actually, even most of the government is unaware. Grush has insinuated that there are multiple figures or groups on the inside that have consistently and deliberately withheld key information or evidence from various flagpole UFO research groups. So if the claims are true, it could yet be that while some in the government are hiding proof of what's out there, many are just as in the dark as the rest of the watching public. The information has simply never been let out. This is by no means the first time that such allegations have been laid at the door of Washington. Perhaps the most infamous and long-lasting UFO claimant against the U.S. government is Bob Lazar. In a story that Lazar has defiantly stood by for upwards of 30 years, he alleges that he worked on top-secret government projects in the early 1980s. And as part of that work, Lazar claims to have been tasked with reverse engineering alien tech. Specifically, he says that he saw anti-gravity technology, the likes of which wasn't just unknown at the time, but was seemingly impossible as per the human understanding of the laws of nature and physics. While the testimonies of Lazar and David Grush have yet to explicitly cross over, the kinds of things that Lazar has always insisted he saw and did are quite similar to those that Grush now seems intent to reveal. Are we now on the brink of full disclosure? And will that finally reveal that aliens do exist? What do you think could happen in the coming weeks, months, or years? A little more than a year prior to David Grush and the debrief, the Pentagon seemingly bowed to growing public pressure by publishing a preliminary assessment on UAP, a short but sweet 9-page document that outlined 144 cases, 143 of which it described as remaining unexplained. For many, it was something of an anticlimax. Unclassified, yes, but inconclusive, definitely. However, the official story has since been built on quite significantly, with the release of the 2022 Annual Report on Unidentified Aerial Phenomenon. Here, the authorities ran us through 510 officially registered UAP cases in total. This included the 144 discussed before, plus 366 new ones. The annual report was longer than its preliminary forerunner, but only just. An 11-page document, it was mostly dedicated to outlining new and improved methods and procedures for collecting UAP data and cataloging it. There was no direct mention of alien spaceships, alien pilots, crashed UFOs, etc. The report did concede, though, that any UAP might pose a threat as either, quite, flight hazards or as potential adversary collection platforms. So far, as per the still limited information that the U.S. authorities have made public, the establishment of the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, or the AARO, is billed as a key development. It's said to be a wide-reaching arm with scope enough to properly coordinate UAP reports and research, linking up all or most other defense and security government branches. Interestingly, though, the AARO is a successor to the UAP task force that had existed beforehand, the same task force that David Grush had worked closely with. Could the restructuring, then, be another attempt to squirrel away information in line with what Grush has claimed? Or is it genuinely a revised and more effective effort to get to the bottom of UAP once and for all? Let us know what you think in the comments. In the aftermath of Grush's various claims, the Department of Defense and NASA both released statements, and perhaps unsurprisingly, neither supported the whistleblower. The DoD said, quote, "To date, AARO has not discovered any verifiable information to substantiate claims that any programs regarding the possession or reverse engineering of any extraterrestrial materials have existed in the past or exist currently," end quote. NASA said that it, quote, "has not found any credible evidence of extraterrestrial life, and there is no evidence that UAPs are extraterrestrial," end quote. That said, there are some major investigations ongoing. Certainly, the conversation has been moved along a lot in just the last couple of years, with even the term UFO swiftly being replaced by the seemingly broader and arguably less taboo UAP. But the increasingly used qualifier non-human is a far thornier one, particularly for the government and official sources to entertain. While the claims made by David Grush might well be described as still quite vague and ambiguous, this turn of phrase means that no matter how often the authorities try to persuade otherwise, no matter that the government reports rarely, if ever, mention extraterrestrials specifically, the talk of aliens just isn't dying down. What's your verdict here? If the government were keeping something as massive as alien life a secret, then it would surely take a monumental effort to do that. So do you think it's possible? Or is even the notion of the state having any kind of wider knowledge or control just too far-fetched to believe?
We're always discovering new chemical elements and how to best use chemistry in increasingly novel ways. This intriguing, incredible, and sometimes bizarre scientific field has changed everything from physics to medicine and is the foundation for much of modern technology. But are there still some things within chemical study that the government would rather we didn't know about? Much has been made state of the mysterious and elusive element 115. First described by the noted conspiracy theorist Bob Lazar in the 1990s, it's claimed by some that element 115 is being kept top secret by the United States government in Area 51, no less. Lazar has said that it is the vital ingredient in the propulsion drives of alien spacecraft that have allegedly crashed down in America. Lazar says the reason he knows this is because he used to work at Area 51 himself, reverse engineering alien tech. Uncorroborated as these claims were and still are, in 2003, element 115 was successfully synthesized in a laboratory, apparently proving that Lazar's story rings true. But what exactly is this element, in legend and in real life? Why did it take us so long to discover? And does the real thing have or trigger all the miraculous properties that Lazar has claimed, like anti-gravity and advanced cloaking? Most importantly of all, how did Lazar seemingly predict the future, and is there a cover-up afoot? Let's take a look at element 115 itself, which is now more widely known by its formal name, Moscovium, after the Russian capital, Moscow. It was first synthesized in 2003 by a group of Russian and American scientists based at the Joint Institute for Nuclear Research, which is headquartered in Dubna, a town just north of Moscow, and is a major academic institution when it comes to novel chemical elements. 115 is simply Moscovium's atomic number, referring to the 115 protons in the atom's nucleus. However, we've never actually observed a normal atom of Moscovium. All so far have been Moscovium isotopes, meaning that they have different numbers of neutrons. These isotopes have also proven extremely unstable, with even the most stable isotope, Moscovium-290, decaying completely in around a second. More broadly, Moscovium is what scientists call a super heavy element because its atomic number is so high. The lightest element of all, and the oldest and most abundant in the universe, is, of course, hydrogen, with its atomic number of 1. Moscovium, element 115, by extreme contrast, is heavy and rare. To a point, heavier elements are created in the cores of stars, under incredible temperatures and pressures through stellar fusion. In stars, hydrogen gets fused into helium, for example, which has an atomic number of 2. Hydrogen and helium might then combine to make increasingly heavier elements like oxygen, nitrogen, and so on. Everything else effectively descends from that process, and is, in a roundabout way, a product of stellar fusion. But still, Moscovium itself wasn't born in a star. So how do we get from there to heavier elements like Moscovium being brewed in a lab? Essentially, by mimicking the process of fusion here on Earth. But that's extremely difficult, and any atom that doesn't appear naturally, i.e. isn't to our knowledge produced in stars, is almost inescapably unstable as a result. Which is why even the most stable Moscovium isotope is here and gone in a couple of moments. The impermanence does create some level of mystery, but there's no cover-up or top-level secrecy at play here. That's just how the science works. Again, in the decades since Moscovium's first discovery, not one even remotely stable isotope, like the one Bob Lazar describes, has been witnessed. So, in this way, Lazar didn't predict the future. His element 115 and the real 115 are totally different. And even if we could maintain a true atom of 115, it's still not expected that it would inspire these kinds of things that Lazar's claimed product could, like the bending of light for invisibility or the general messing up of physics. Ultimately, predicting the future, at least in terms of the periodic table, actually isn't all that difficult. It's been done before, many times, and often with success. It was the Russian scientist Dmitry Mendeleev, back in 1869, who first devised and wrote up the periodic table of elements, although it has been revised a handful of times since then. Mendeleev had the brainwave to order the known chemical elements by their atomic weights. In doing so, and even back then, he was able to identify blank spots for certain elements that he believed to exist based on his method, but which hadn't yet been discovered. In time, many of those elements were eventually found, and stranger yet, Mendeleev was able to use his deep knowledge of chemistry to not only predict their existence, but also correctly guess how they might behave. For example, one element predicted by Mendeleev, technetium, was eventually discovered in 1937, a whole 30 years after Mendeleev had died, and more than 60 years since he'd first decided that it must exist. Technetium was also the first true synthetic element, serving to prove that humans could create as yet unseen chemicals in labs. Fast forward back to 2003, and that's the context for how the true element 115, moscovium, became possible. By almost filling in the gaps of the periodic table and adding to it based on the easily predictable progression from lighter to heavier elements. No aliens necessary, nor stripped down alien spaceships. The general feeling then is that we would have arrived at 115 regardless of Bob Lazar's earlier shapings of it as some kind of ET keystone. That the most likely true story behind it is simply that at the time Lazar started talking about it, a decade before it was synthesized, element 115 was still an unknown that was just out of reach. An element on the periodic table theorized to exist, and one that, according to those who are more cynical about Lazar's claim, was perfectly placed to give weight to his ideas. In a similar vein, it's possible that an element 119 exists too, but also hasn't been discovered yet. Could it one day become the crucial ingredient to an alleged alien cover-up as well? The wider scientific consensus has for a long time laid major challenge to Bob Lazar's claims. Unsurprisingly, the official line continually does not back him up. And while there are reported discrepancies, such as Lazar's name apparently appearing in a phone directory for a lab that officially he never worked for, the story of element 115 remains split. Split between what really happened in 21st century science and what Lazar and the resulting conspiracy theories claim to have happened. Many scientists insist that most of what Lazar has said about moscovium is patently untrue, that 115 can't be used to harness any of the claimed powers, from gravity waves to invisibility cloaks, and we know that now, more than ever, because we have actually seen this stuff in action, even if only as an isotope and only for a few seconds. To boot, remember the discovery of moscovium was officially a joint scientific endeavor between the Russian and US governments. It's not alone either, with other super heavy elements having been synthesized in the same lab in Russia, the Joint Institute for Nuclear Research, including, for instance, element 117, tennessine, which was discovered in 2010 and named as per the American state. There are few signs that 115 has ever been kept particularly secret or hidden then, not since it was first synthesized in 2003, at which point Lazar's until then mythical substance was brought out into the open, and frankly, it disappointed anyone who had expected what Lazar had promised. This wasn't the birth of anti-gravity and ET capabilities just yet. It was just the adding of another element to an ever-growing table. If such an element with such incredible properties did exist, it's arguably easy to imagine the US or Russian governments hiding it, but perhaps less easy to imagine them sharing the ruse with each other. And what's more, if there is anything out there that's known to us and capable of even some of what's been claimed, then why keep it secret at all? It would surely make an extremely useful and profitable commercial technology. For now, All the evidence suggests that while element 115 does exist, it doesn't yet bring any world-changing revelations. An unstable radioisotope among many, this super-heavy element is certainly still interesting. But as science, and not conspiracy, currently understands it, it's perhaps not of alien origin. Maybe Lazar was simply mistaken, and what he saw was actually something different. Or maybe the entire tale is highly questionable from the beginning. What's your verdict?
Why was the government doing this? What were they trying to find out?
Well, the First World War had been a chemical war, and there was every expectation that the Second World War would be one as well.
This is Unveiled. And today we're counting down our picks for the top 10 discoveries the government hid from the public. For this list, we'll be looking at events, atrocities, and scientific discoveries various governments swept under the rug, but were later uncovered.
Would this piece of celluloid finally provide the definitive evidence for which monster hunters had been waiting since 1933?
What's the craziest thing your country's government has hidden from its people? Be sure to share with us in the comments below. Number 10. Laika's cause of death.
This is the dog Laika. It had been trained to live in a special container. The apparatus, test animal, and power sources on the Sputnik weighed half a ton.
The space race between the US and the Soviet Union resulted in the unfortunate deaths of several animals, but the most famous was Laika. The adorable dog was found on the streets of Moscow as a stray and recruited to the space program. Scientists knew she would perish on her voyage to space, and one even took her home before her tragic mission, so she could experience a bit of peace. Laika became the first animal to orbit the Earth in 1957. The government hid Laika's cause of death from the public, making it seem like she passed from oxygen depletion or was euthanized. However, in 2002, it was revealed that Laika passed due to overheating mere hours into the trip.
It proved a point of tremendous importance, that life could continue in space.
Fly high, sweet pup. Number 9. POTUS's secret hit list. As one of the most powerful people in the world, the President of the United States has special clearance and access to hidden documents. However, as the New York Times reported in 2012, the President can also keep a top-secret document of their own. Interviews with several former and current advisors uncovered President Obama's process for approving top targets that were unknown to the general public. The list was filled with known and suspected terrorists of varying backgrounds, and the president took it upon himself to personally oversee counterterrorism efforts. While President Obama took a more direct approach than most other presidents, the discovery does shine light on the power and secrecy of the Oval Office.
The president understands the gravity of these issues. That is why he is committed to taking very seriously his responsibilities in this.
Number 8. Protecting the Loch Ness Monster.
Last week, Japanese scientists placed explosive detonators at the bottom of Lake Loch Ness to blow Nessie out of the water. Sir Court Godfrey of the Nessie Alliance summoned the help of Scotland's local wizards to cast a protective spell over the lake and its local residents, and all those who seek for the peaceful existence of our underwater ally.
The mysterious cryptid colloquially known as Nessie is the subject of much debate. Although it has been the subject of folklore for centuries, Loch Ness Monster mania reached a fever pitch after the now debunked surgeon's photograph was released in 1934. In 2010, previously hidden documents revealed that Scottish police once made moves to find the creature and protect it from hunters. In the 1930s, police officers requested help from Britain's Parliament to confirm the Loch Ness Monster's existence.
There has never been any shortage of eyewitness sightings offering evidence that the monster or monsters exist.
Local officials worried that if the creature was found by monster hunters, it would be destroyed or seriously injured. Although the documents were hidden for decades, they show just how far officers were willing to go to protect Nessie and give new hope to cryptozoologists around the world.
And one thing hasn't changed since the Nessie heyday of the 1930s. The lure of an encounter with the unknown.
Number 7. Effects of radioactive elements.
Scientists have been studying the effects of radiation on the body for over 100 years, so we know quite a bit about how radiation interacts with living tissue.
Scientists studying radioactive elements carried out experiments to test their effects in controlled conditions on at least 30 human subjects between 1945 and 1947. The civilians were each injected with americium, plutonium, polonium, and uranium at 4 different hospitals around the United States. Researchers studied various samples from the test subjects to determine how long radioactive material remained in the body and how much was needed to damage various organs.
Then what you're saying is that the amount of plutonium inside me could be 3 times less than you even think?
Or 3 times greater.
The experiments and their findings were kept under wraps for decades, but the Department of Energy finally released detailed reports in 1995. Although all of the subjects had sadly passed away, their families received compensation from the federal government. Number 6, Operation Paperclip.
Does accomplishment cancel out past crimes?
That, I think, is the conundrum of Operation Paperclip.
As the U.S. and the Soviet Union emerged as global superpowers after World War II and entered the Cold War, the U.S. developed a top-secret intelligence program called Operation Paperclip. Between 1945 and 1959, the United States government took in more than 1,600 scientists formerly employed by Nazi Germany, including former leaders in the Nazi Party. These scientists made discoveries and developed technology for their former enemies, especially in the fields of aeronautics and rocketry. Additionally, the United States employed leaders of the nightmarish Unit 731 of Japan for biological warfare research in exchange for immunity. The scientists' pasts were swept under the rug even after their deaths, and many of them completely evaded any consequences tied to their crimes against humanity. Number 5, mustard gas effects. Chemical warfare is horrifying enough, but using damaging substances on your own soldiers is almost unthinkable. During World War II, 60,000 United States soldiers were subjected to tests to discover the effects of mustard gas and lewisite.
The First World War had been a chemical war, and there was every expectation that the Second World War would be one as well. So the Allied governments, Canada, the United States, Great Britain, Australia, all prepared for a chemical war.
The soldiers were exposed to the chemical agents in a variety of ways, but they all resulted in significant damages, for which the soldiers did not receive medical care. To add an even more diabolical level to the experiments, the soldiers were divided into groups based on race to supposedly test the effects of mustard gas on different skin colors. The soldiers who underwent these terrible experiments were sworn to secrecy and could not reveal the effects of the tests for decades afterwards. Number 4, Project MK-Ultra.
It's a lot easier to break a man than you might think. Dr. Olson. Confusion to the enemy.
Methods of extracting confessions can range from mild to mortifying, and this top-secret human experimentation project by the United States CIA definitely tipped the scales to the latter. Between 1953 and 1973, the CIA carried out a series of mind control experiments on thousands of people to discover the effects of hypnosis, torture, abuse, and psychoactive drugs such as LSD.
With a dose of mere micrograms, the mind becomes confused. Perception is distorted. Personal identity is called into question. The results can be euphoric bliss or deadly panic.
During one particular experiment called Operation Midnight Climax, the agency set up brothels in San Francisco and studied the combined effects of sex and drugs behind one-way mirrors. Despite the CIA's attempts to destroy evidence in the wake of Watergate, Project MK-Ultra and many of its atrocities and findings eventually came to light.
Here they took this drug, LSD, and thought that they were going to be able to use it to control people's minds, and the unbelievable irony is that LSD is a drug that does exactly the opposite. It frees your mind.
Number 3, Churchill and UFOs.
So everything at that time, particularly if they suspected it was a German weapon, would have been kept secret.
From Area 51 to Soviet astronomers calling for investigations into UFOs in the 1960s, unidentified flying objects have had a not-so-secret past with many of the world's governments. According to documents released in 2010, Winston Churchill apparently ordered that reports of UFO sightings and encounters be covered up during World War II.
During the war, lots of Lancaster bomber crews, for instance, came back and reported having been followed by what they described as balls of fire.
During one incident, a Royal Air Force bomber crew encountered and photographed a hovering metallic UFO. Churchill allegedly even went a step further and had the documents covered up for at least 50 years to avoid creating mass panic. Unfortunately, many first-hand accounts were destroyed before they could be declassified, creating even more mystery.
Winston Churchill took a UFO encounter during the Second World War so seriously, he ordered the information be kept quiet. The incident was said to have involved an RAF plane flying over the English coastline, intercepted by a strange metallic object.
Number 2. Effects of biological warfare. During the 1950s and 1960s, the U.S. government conducted several experiments on its own citizens to discover the impacts of biological warfare. In 1950, the U.S. Navy carried out Operation Sea Spray by spraying bacteria 2 miles off the coast of San Francisco to study how a city of its size would respond to bioweapon attacks. The Navy believed the particular bacteria they used could not harm humans. However, several Bay Area citizens suffered from serious urinary tract infections due to the experiment, with one patient even passing away after 3 weeks of suffering.
Believe it or not, I'm on the prowl for some water records.
You come to the right place.
I guess I did.
Despite the deadly consequences of Operation Sea Spray, the experiment and its impact were hidden until 1976. Number 1. Tuskegee Syphilis Study.
They won't tell you nothing. Just tell you, come roll your sleeve up.
As we've discussed, the U.S. government has carried out quite a few unethical studies and experiments on its own citizens, but this is the most horrifying of them all. Between 1932 and 1972, the CDC and the U.S. Public Health Service conducted a study on hundreds of African Americans who had syphilis under the guise of providing health care.
By the late 1930s and early 40s, large numbers of men on the study were dying. Public Health Service documents show that the death rate of those in the study was now twice that of the non-syphilitic black population of Macon County.
The officials hid the patient's syphilis diagnosis from them and withheld known effective treatments such as penicillin, causing massive devastation over the decades. News of the study finally broke in 1972, causing it to finally be terminated. By the time the study ended, more than 100 people had died, dozens more had been infected, and at least 19 children were born with congenital syphilis.
I treated a number of these patients and still have a few who were in the study. And the federal government has such a guilty conscience that they will buy them a 10-speed bicycle if I say it's medically necessary.
So what do you think? Is the government hiding something big from space? As we've seen, there certainly is precedent for the authorities withholding key information over the last few decades. So could there be yet more national and international secrets that are being kept under wraps? What's clear is that over the coming years, the push for disclosure will become more and more prominent, not only for matters relating to space, but there surely is a growing interest in anything extraterrestrial in particular. Are we on the verge of a massive revelation? Or the uncovering of a deeply entrenched mystery? The knowledge of the future is always just over the horizon.
What do you think? Is there anything we missed? Let us know in the comments. Check out these other clips from Unveiled, and make sure you subscribe and ring the bell for our latest content.